Hello, everyone. This is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. This is our regular series where we talk about making music, the act of music creation, composing, arranging, improvising, playing by ear, all the creative acts of making music. So, as has been what we've been doing lately and will continue to be doing going forward a bit, we're looking at Counterpoint. We're looking at the coursework from my Practical Counterpoint course. And this is going to be a fun session, I think, today, especially so because we have these projects that people have been doing in which we took an existing two-part piece, whether it was, existing in the sense of someone else wrote it, like a Bach two-part piece, or maybe your own project that you had done from the previous section of the course where we were working on two-part projects, and then add a third part to it. So yeah, that is what we're going to be looking at are these three-part projects, and it's really interesting to see the different kinds of things that people have come up with. I think the general feeling going into this was, oh, if the piece was already complete with two voices, how am I going to be able to add a third voice? And I think people are solving that marvelously. We've gotten quite a few submissions, and everyone's finding great creative solutions for adding the third part. And wow, it's snowing in Denver, so I am not in Denver at the moment. I'm a bit further south, and we are not getting snow, but it's definitely cool here. All right, so we're just going to jump in and start looking at some of the pieces in no particular order. I mean, lots of great submissions, and I just wanted to highlight a few, not based on like, oh, these are the best or the worst or whatever. I mean, they were all good. They all had good things going on, but they were ones in which I thought I had things that I wanted other people to see, either because they were good examples of something or because I have a comment about them that I think is going to apply to a lot of other people's. So that's what we're doing here, and let's just go ahead and get that going. So give me one moment. Actually, do it this way and pin the chat. Sometimes I like to do that pinning thing with the chat, and sometimes I don't. But there we go. All right, so we are going to be checking out the this song of resignation arranged by Kelly Osbourne, and it's a Bach piece that was just a two-part piece that he's added a third part to, and yeah, we're just gonna look at that. I've commented on every one's things here, and what I'm going to talk about on this one, I think, is going to be a comment that I can give to pretty much everyone, and has to do with what we're doing with that extra voice rhythmically. So in this case, the original was the outer voices, and it's the inner voices that he has. Come on. It doesn't want to zoom. Every once in a while it does that, and I never figure out why, but that's okay. We're just going to check it out. So here we go. Oops, let's do that again with more volume. More volume. All right, here we go. All right, so that is the piece, and I just realized that, yes, indeed, thank you, Kevin, I didn't share the screen. So this piece had a piano dynamic marking on it, and so it was quiet. And so I've turned up my own volume to the max here, and I don't know if there's a really easy, convenient way for me to send more volume on it, but let's just check out a little bit of the beginning of this again. So what's happening here is we have a very homorhythmic texture, right? Everything is all quarter notes. So first of all, this is to me a great example of how you can take a piece that was complete as it was. I mean, this piece was originally it was just that. And I did turn up the volume a little louder after I started, so that does help. So it was just that, just the one note in each hand thing, and he is successfully, I say he, I don't actually know that, because Kelly could, be either way, so I apologize if I'm misgendering people here, but uh, the way the inner voice fills in here feels extremely natural, right? It totally fits the harmony, the lines feel natural, and boy, that leading tone, that G sharp, this part right here, this measure, that was fine the way Bach wrote it, but man, didn't it add so much getting to hear that G sharp in there? I mean, that just really, it added so much because when you're writing two-part counterpoint, something always has to give. And typically, we try to make sure we keep the third of a chord, and we keep leading tones, we keep the notes that are really kind of functionally important, but sometimes you have to sacrifice them. In this case, it was to have that contrary motion that Bach had going there, and he had to sacrifice the leading tone. He's like, yeah, okay, but now we got to add it, right? So beautiful. And then this line here. So you get that steady stream of eighth notes, ba-dum, and then ba-da-dum, and then you get ba-da-da-da-dum, and then you get ba-da-da-da-dum, right? You get that cascade of the different voices coming down. And so it's really just really nicely integrated. So the comment that I'm going to be making about this that again applies to other things is check out this next passage. That homorhythmic passage is really nice, right? It's great having distinctive rhythms like that get to be doubled in another voice. And so that it's a really effective technique to have those parallel thirds or parallel sixths, and here they're thirds. It's just a very effective technique. It does mean that it's not as polyphonic as it otherwise might be, right? If you have all three voices with different rhythms, that's, maximum polyphony. But letting two voices kind of keep a similar rhythm sometimes is a really effective device, especially when it's like a really interesting rhythm or an especially intricate part that, having contrary rhythms would, or opposing rhythms, different rhythm, independent rhythms would maybe obscure that interesting part. Because everything else is mostly just quarter notes. So what I would say is that everywhere else is an opportunity for that middle voice to do different things. So he's got a little bit of that going on. He's got the passing note here. He's got that really nice cascading figure here. He's got this little offset figure here. That it's a really nice line here that's, independent of the rhythm that was in the other. Now, it's actually kind of related in that we have a dotted quarter in the melody here, and then he has a quarter tied to an eighth a beat earlier. So there's a little bit of echoing of similar rhythms. So anyhow, this to me was just a really good example of that kind of thing. So great job, Kelly. All right, I have a whole bunch of pieces queued up, and I'm just going to play a few more of them, and we'll get to hear some other things going on. So Graham did this version of the Sky Boat song that he had arranged for two voices, and we listened to that last week, and now he's added a third voice. He first posted a version where he used, I think, a clarinet or a saxophone or something for the middle voice. And now but he really wanted it to be viola. He just wasn't sure about how to get the clefs to be readable. And now he's done that. He's using the octave clef here, right? The treble clef with an 8 on it, which means that this middle part sounds an octave lower than written. So the B that we're starting off with here is the B is actually below that D. So this is, in fact, a middle voice. I think pretty consistently. It's possible that even transpose an octave, it might jump above the melody somewhere. But I'm looking at it, and I don't know that it does. So anyhow, let's listen to this now. All right. Great job, Graham. Oh, and you did make it. I was thinking that you had said you weren't going to be able to. We're glad you're here. And yeah, tenor sax, that's what it was. So this worked really well as a two-part piece, and I was enjoying talking last week about how he was using the rhythms kind of echoing each other so that his counterpoint, which was the bottom line, used some of the same rhythms as the original melody. And so now he's got places where, like this new part, the viola part, is obviously following the cello rhythmically for portions of it, right? For those first 4 bars, the viola and cello are basically together. But he doesn't have that triplet rhythm thing, that special rhythm. This should have a name, ba-da-dum-bum. I don't know if it does, but it's the ba-da-dum-bum rhythm. I don't know. So he's not using that in the viola, which is, I think, good because it makes it feel a little more distinct to not always be echoing them completely. He echoes it here, and now in the next phrase, now that middle voice is echoing the top. And by echoing, I don't mean coming after. I mean coinciding with. I don't know of a better word for that. It's following the upper part, the melody part. Right? So he's got that going on here now where that middle part is following the top part. And then there's other places like here where the middle part has its own unique rhythm. All 3 parts have their own rhythm. Right? They each have their own distinct rhythms. And that's what you want. You want that sort of mixture. And even more so here. Right? Each of the parts has its own distinct rhythm, and they're all working beautifully. And I see that, Graham, that you've modified it from how it originally was, because I had made a couple comments about voice leading, and it looks like maybe they are, yeah, you resolved a couple sevenths differently, and this is a thing that comes up. So let's look at the original part here in this measure. It was like this. Right? That was what was happening. And that makes total sense. The C was the third of that A minor chord, and the F sharp was the third of the D7 chord. So as a 2-voice counterpoint, that made perfect sense. The issue is, well, what happens when you want to add a third part? When you want to add a third part, I love the choice of adding that 7th in there. But if you add the 7th on that A minor chord, that 7th really wants to go down to the 3rd, right? But if you do that, you're going to have a doubled leading tone. you're going to have to make that choice over and over again. That's just the way it is. If you've got two parts that are feeling complete because you've got a third in there, and then you want to add a seventh somewhere else, you're going to look at it and go, man, that seventh really wants to go to the third also. And then you're going to have to decide, well, do you want to change your original part there so that only one of them, because this guy doesn't really need to go to that, right? This part would have been happy to take the A, right? It could have gone like this. And then the bottom part still could have done that, or the middle part could have taken that. So if you have the freedom to change one of the two existing parts, that's how you solve that problem. By saying, well, only one of you is going to take the third. My new part's needs that third because that seventh is going to the third. I'll let someone else take a different part. But if these parts are fixed because it's part of the imitation scheme, we'll be talking much more about imitation starting next week. Changing that line to not have an F sharp might mess up things. It might mean, oh, it's no longer imitating what it was supposed to imitate, right? Or it's the melody, and you don't want to change the melody, right? So there's any number of reasons why you might not want to change that part, in which case you just have to make this difficult choice. Am I going to let that seventh not resolve by step that seventh resolving to the third is what we normally expect. Are we going to just say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to let it leap away and be okay with it? Or do we find a way of splitting the difference? Like, if it had gone to the F sharp, and just really quickly played that F sharp and gotten out of the way, then we'd only hear the doubled F sharp really briefly. So that would be an option. The other option is to say, you know what, as much as I like the seventh, I'm just not going to use it here. I'm going to use a fifth. And then, then you don't need to resolve it anywhere in particular. So there's lots of different ways of addressing this, but this issue is going to come up over and over again. And so Graham's piece was a good opportunity to talk about it. Now, I love the fact that he added some sevenths that were non-diatonic, right? His original harmonization here it just had a G chord, a G triad, but he let his harmony part add a seventh. And that's so nice. It is so nice to hear that dominant seventh chord there. And he's got a couple of other places where he's done similar kinds of things. And so that's a situation where you're like, yeah, I really want that seventh. And here, that seventh wants to come down to the third E. The third is the melody note. So you're not going to sacrifice that. Here again, I would say probably you could get away with doubling that E briefly, because at least it's not the leading tone here, right? That F sharp was a little more problematic as far as the doubling because it's the leading tone. At least this E isn't the leading tone, so I wouldn't worry about that doubling. And if it went like this, let me just hold on to the F. And then it could go down to the C, right? So you could put an E here on beat 2 and then use that figure again. So something like... it goes on there. I think I'm playing that correctly. So anyhow, those are kind of options to play with, but I think that Graham just made some really marvelous choices. There's other places here, like this is a place where he did resolve that seventh. Right? So here he's resolved that seventh, the G, to the third here. Okay, are there parallel octaves if I did that? Maybe. I wasn't paying attention. Were there? Were there parallel octaves? Where I'm not sure where you saw them. There was, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where you were seeing them. I'm not going to say there weren't, but the only octave, yeah, I'm not sure where you saw. So feel free to put in more information there. But yeah, so this G, so the melody here, I don't see any octaves at all, right? I mean, so that's what I'm not understanding. Um, yeah, I'm not seeing any octaves. This is treble clef here, not bass, right? Maybe that's something that you're, because if you're looking at this as being bass clef, you're thinking of this as a B and that as an E, in which case those are parallel octaves, but this is treble clef. But there would be two notes converging on the E for sure. Oh yeah, that's an octave lower. So um, it's not parallel octaves, but hidden octaves, where we're moving in similar motion to that E, right? We're moving in similar motion to it. We're not coming from another octave, but we are moving in similar motion to an octave, and that's definitely something to think about. But given all the other compromises we're trying to balance here, that's one of those rules that's like, well, if you can avoid it, try to, and if not, this to me is a situation, personally. And same with this double leading tone here. I mean, I really like how this works. And here, yes, we're doubling that leading tone for a second and moving, that's an A, and we're moving in similar motion to that octave again, but given all the other things that we're juggling, yeah, that's maybe the lesser of any of the evils. And then again, this F sharp at least we leave. You could also consider leaving this F sharp even quicker, with a couple of sixteenths, if you were concerned about that doubled leading tone sound. Anyhow, nice work there. All right, I'm going to keep moving on here. And we're now going to look at, wait a minute, is this the one? No, this is a different one. Sorry. We're going to look at, we're going to check out Jimmy's piece. That was not related to the course, but it was an interesting piece that I want to talk about. We're going to look at Kevin Johnson's arrangement of Henry Purcell. And here's another, I pronounced it Purcell growing up, but now I'm told it's Purcell. So there you go. Someone else might want to correct me. Actually, one of the very first pieces I ever played on the piano, I think for a recital piece, was one of his. So we're going to hear this. This was another one that was a two-voice piece. Just those two outer parts, and Kevin has added this middle part. And this is going to be, to me, very similar to the story with Kelly's version of taking a Bach piece that was for two voices, adding a third voice, and when you look at it, you're like, yeah, that feels like it should have been there all along. So check this out. Just wonderful, just wonderful. So I don't actually have much in the way of comments to share on this. It's just really well done. One of the things that Kevin does really well on a lot of his pieces is attention to detail in the articulations and so forth, right? These little staccato passages and everything that really add some interest above and beyond just the notes, right? And so, and using the dynamics and phrasing and stuff. So these pieces always feel especially well done. So good job on that, Kevin. One thing I just noticed now that I hadn't noticed before, if Purcell had written this, would he have put an F natural at the end, or would he have put an F sharp at the end? What do you think? That Picardy third was pretty big in that era. but I don't know enough of his music to know if he was like religiously attached to it, or if he, like, it's pretty rare to find a Bach piece of this nature that doesn't use one. But a lot of these Bach pieces would just end because the original doesn't have a third, right? It's just roots and fifths, which is pretty typical. Pretty typical that these types of pieces would end with no third if you've only got two voices, just roots and fifths. Because you want the root in the bass and you want the root in the melody, and the bass line is probably just gonna 1-5-1 is a real typical thing. So yeah, that is just such a nice uh, um, just a really nice line in the middle that was added. And yeah, I know sort of what you're talking about. I think this measure here, right? And Kevin had mentioned about this. There's an ascending eighth note run that doesn't follow counterpoint guidelines. And the thing is, yeah, so what do the guidelines say? Well, it says don't have that. And to me, that wasn't really an issue. That was totally fine. My ears are accustomed to that sound. Would Bach have done that? Probably not. Would Bach have used a B natural there? Maybe. Would Purcell have used a B natural? Maybe. But do our ears accept the B flat? Yeah, I think totally so. And also the fact that it's like we're coming out of this arpeggio and continuing this scale up. I played it with the B natural that time. Yeah, that's all totally fine also. So yeah, Purcell wasn't into the Picardy thirds, and that F natural could be a thing. Because yeah, actually yeah, I say that one of the very first recital pieces I ever played was one of his, but other than that, I've barely played anything of his at all. Not super familiar with his music. Um, yeah, but this is just really nice, and just check out how independent this line is, right? It starts off with eighth notes when no one else has eighth notes, and then it's got the 16th note passage when no one else does have anything like that. And actually, it's the only place where there's 16th notes, which is fine because the original piece was mostly quarters and some eighths, right? Some half notes. It was kind of a quarter note average with some eighths and some half notes. And so the middle part adds more motion with eighths and even some sixteenths and just adds that much more interest. And so, yeah, I just think it's just really well done. It's very contrapuntal. In other words, there's very few of the places where you see things like what, yeah, not that one again. I mean, again, not that one. I'm going to just close that tab so we look at it later, Jimmy. All these places that I talked about where these two voices have the same rhythm, which is a nice texture. Kevin's not choosing to use that texture anywhere, right? He hasn't given himself any of those sorts of parallel motion passages, but you don't need to do that. It's just an interesting technique. If I had chosen to do that on this piece, I'm not even sure where I would do it, and maybe that's part of the problem. Problem as far as why I don't think it was appropriate to do here. That da 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 dum rhythm, da 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 dum happens all over the place, right? That da 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 dum, Carol of the Bells rhythm is all over this piece, right? Almost every single measure is that same rhythm. If there was one measure that did something significantly different rhythmically, that's the measure that I would have chosen to add the parallel motion to. So if there was some rhythm, some measure where instead of ba da da dum, it had gone ba da 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 da, four eighth notes followed by the quarter, I might choose to emphasize that by doing the parallel thirds or parallel sixths at that point. So as it is, the rhythm here is so repetitive in the main melody, and the bottom part, of course, is just the quarter notes. The clarinet got to take all of the interest. All right, so that reminds me of something else, and I'm going to flip over to see if I can figure out which score it was. I just wanted to talk about in the sense of the middle part, because I thought, yeah, this is the one. Shelley. So I love it when I don't know the piece because then I can really be objective about it. If I already know the piece, then it's hard to be objective, but I'm going to flip next to one that I was familiar with. We're going to listen to this piece of Shelley's, and the clarinet part is the added part. Here again, it was originally basically two-part piece. Well, it wasn't just two parts, right? So if it says it was for recorder and continuo, what that really means is the continuo is someone was supposed to play chords based on this bass line. In other words, it wasn't meant to just be that, but right, you're supposed to play chords, kind of like a jazz pianist would. That's what a continuo player does. So it was originally had chords going with it, but no written out line, apparently. So I think the line that Shelley has added here, to me, I think in the mix, the clarinet is coming out a bit louder than the flute. And listen to it. To me, that's the star of the show here. And I think that was kind of the case in Kevin's also. It was all over the place. It was very decorative, right, with all the sixteenths and everything. Shelley's here is just a really strong melody that she's added here that's totally distinct. And just check it out. Oops, let me start it. I'm going to get it with the pickup. Okay, so this is just really marvelous in so many ways. I mean, first of all the handling of the intervals and the note choices and the, resolutions of dissonance and everything, it's all totally square, so nothing is jumping out as being, oh, that note didn't work there for whatever reason. So that stuff kind of needs to be in place before you can get into this next level of stuff, which is just how does that line work? But check out that line. I mean, I'm going to sing it. I mean, to me, that line is the star of the show. The original melody, that's a fine line. That's an okay line, but I think Shelley's made a really, a stronger line as her counterpoint. So just little touches like that. I'm now like asking myself, man, was that even the part that? I mean, that's just such a perfect line. I mean, that's just that's just like that's the kind of line you want to write. If you weren't just trying to fill in parts, but you were just trying to write a good melody. That's exactly the kind of line you'd want to write. It's got that nice little motif that then kind of sequences. It's got that little variation of the sixteenths. I mean, this is just, I just really love how this came out. So this to me is another kind of poster child for how you can take a piece that was basically complete as is and add something to it and have something that's like, even better. It's just really wonderful how that works. She's done a number of things rhythmically here that are interesting like that. Like, because this could have just gone, starting here, could have just done that. And I think part of the reason she didn't do that was just to have the variety, but also so that she could get these little parallel those little parallel sixths that happen, because the melody has the sixteenths here, whereas over here, well, I guess there it also had sixteenths, so it could have done the same thing, could have gone, could have done that. So she chose to make that little variation in the rhythm, and you can either do that, you can either say, I'm going to keep that same rhythm, or I'm going to vary it. And the fact that the melody has exactly the same rhythm, is it like a nice reason to want to have that slight variation in the accompaniment. Um, so anyhow, that's yeah, I just really like how that all worked out, and good job. This little rhythm here, it's just so interesting, right? Ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, bum, ba-da-da-dum. I mean, so think about this. We have the 2/16 and the eighth, then a long note. Then we have 2/16 and an eighth and a sort of long note, right? So 2/16 and an eighth, and then you get, which is echoing that rhythm, but then it continues with some sixteenths, and then a syncopation. I mean, yeah, I just love what you've done with this. So great job. Yeah, I'm just going to keep going because this is so fun, and we have more music to listen to. So I just mentioned that uh, sometimes it's fun to listen to a piece that I've never heard before and check out what's going on and be objective about how the parts are relating. And then also it can be interesting in other ways to take a piece that I am familiar with. So I related this story, but I'm going to relate it again because it's a story. And did I miss a comment in here? Let me just flip over to this window, make sure. Uh, Oh, okay, no. So this sonatina by Clementi is, for all intents and purposes, the first music that I heard played live. I mean, that's not quite true because, as a small child, I'm sure I went to like my grandparents sang in a group, an old, like a old timers. It was called the Old Timers, I think is what it was called. And anyhow, but my kindergarten teacher thought I needed a hobby. Is how I got into music. She said, "I think he should have a hobby. What would you think about music?" And my mom was like, "Well, my mother's a musician. I used to play piano." And they got a piano. And then my mother dragged out her book of Clementi sonatinas and started practicing this piece. And that's was the bug in my ear. Music wasn't really on my radar until that point in kindergarten. And hearing my mom play this piece. Was uh, kind of what got me interested in music. And I don't think I said, "Oh, I want to do that. Can I take lessons?" But it was more like, "Well, you've been hearing this music here. Would you like to do that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess maybe. I don't know." I'm kindergarten. I didn't have strong feelings about things like that yet. But anyhow, so this is the piece that got me into music. So here, and again, it was originally basically. Right? It was originally a two-part. I mean, there was, I think, a couple extra notes thrown in, but it was for the most part, right? It might have had a chord there. I don't, see, now I don't even remember. It's been too long. But so she's simplified it as necessary to just the melody and the bass line, but then added her own counterpoint in the middle. And here again, I think the counterpoint in the middle works quite well. This is Catherine's, right? So Catherine in snowy Denver. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's Catherine's piece. So let's listen to Catherine's piece here. Yeah, so it's going to do that. So it takes a moment for MuseScore to wake itself up after I've been doing other things. So hopefully this will play a little more successfully. But if it doesn't, then I apologize. Yeah. So really great job there, and also just because I am curious. So I see, Catherine, you're saying it's from a Suzuki piano and harp book, but that makes me wonder if that's not an adaptation. So I actually do want to look up the original and just remind myself of what the original actually looked like. Because I do want to actually compare if there were additional notes that were stripped out, to what extent your notes actually follow those. So I'm going to go with this version here. I look for editors' names that I recognize, whether I think that they're, particularly great editors or not. So I suppose I could have grabbed the version from MuseScore.com so we listened to its playback because yeah, this is the version actually that we had growing up, I think. Come on. That's a different one. I would have thought the C major one was first. I should have looked that up first. Only because it's common for people to present collections. All right, well, I'm going to try that on MuseScore.com. And just grab a version from MuseScore.com so that way we, if I need to play that, I can, although I would be able to play that myself. So here's the official score version. And yeah, it looks like it is just the two notes. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any place where it actually adds another note. I just couldn't remember. Okay, so let's come back to Catherine's version then. So one thing that she's done, and I mentioned this, is starts it an octave higher here, and then comes down an octave lower for the next phrase. Well, that's not in the original, right? The original stayed in the same octave. So what that means is now her melody that she's working from is a much more expanded range than the original as far as that goes. And then she jumps octaves again here. And what that means is now her counterpoint can also be a more expanded range. So she's doing this thing of like letting the new part, the violin part, echo the cello. And again, I mean echo at the same time. But so it's just the quarter note, the quarter note, the quarter note, but then she's got the eighth notes that follow the flute part. So there's some places where the accompaniment, where the new part is following the bottom part, some places where the new part is following the top part, and then some places like this next measure where it's got its own rhythm, quarter and 2/8. No one else has quarter and 2/8, right? So that's exactly what you want. And so, yeah, it's got that really nice balance, and all these lines work really well. This part is my favorite. I mean, that's just like, that's exactly, it just works out perfectly, right? And this is one of those places where when you find something like that works, you get to have that little bit of contrary that little bit of parallel motion, and then contrary motion, and then it lands on that nice perfect fifth there, that it really solidifies that G chord there. So it's like one of those things you just love it when it works out that way. Because sometimes you want to create a sound like that, and it's like, oh, well, this note's not right, and I would have to change that to make this work. Here, it just works, and it takes a certain type of instinct to realize that. And in particular, notice her approach into it, right? Because she had a leap down from that D to the B. Now, did she have to leap down to it? No, because I would say that if this had been a D, C, B, then that line might have gone a little more smoothly, the leading into it. As it is, there's nothing wrong with the ED going into the B, but it's once you arrive on the B that the magic starts, right? So that's the magic. And so I'm not pointing that out to say, oh, it would have been, that she should have done this other thing, but, that's up to you. But the point is, you have to realize that this line is going to work. And so I'm giving you extra credit, Catherine, for recognizing that this line was going to work really well if you start on B, because your line seemed like it was going somewhere else, but then you recognize, no, I need to get to a B, and if I start on B, then good things work out. Because sometimes you just stumble onto success. Here, you had to go out of your way to put that B there, knowing that that was the note that would fill that chord, and then find that line. And so sometimes it's just it's just an intuition. It's not true intuition in the sense of it's something you're born with. It's the learned intuition in the sense of tasting a soup and go, this needs oregano, right? So How do you know that? I don't know from having tasted soups before. But yeah, these lines, and I love again this contrary motion over here. And all those little places where she lets it go down to just one voice and then bring in the second voice just for a couple of beats to get these variety in textures. I think it's just really well done. And again, this might not be playable on the piano anymore because of how the octaves are spread now, but as an instrumental arrangement, I think it works absolutely beautifully. And what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, the one comment that I had made here was about this leap here. Uh, this is maybe a little awkward, that F to the B tritone leap there. It's not like hugely problematic or anything, but it's like the one place where I heard something was like, "Ah, I wonder if there was some, better approach into that would be possible." And that was a comment I had made. So yeah, rests are super powerful, and this I think is one of the best examples in all of the submissions as far as use of rests to create these different textures. Let it be one voice sometimes, let it be two voices sometimes, and so forth. So yeah, that was one of the most successful parts about this, I thought, and one of the reasons I wanted to show it was, to show that really nice control of the textures. So great job there. All right, I am going to now come back and actually let me just see because the comment I added, I want to see what I suggested as far as that tritone. No, that's the wrong one. Yeah, somewhere in one of these I commented about it, but yeah, about that tritone and suggested alternatives. But there's nothing particularly wrong with a leap of a tritone, especially in instrumental music. But doesn't it's something you think about. You think a little bit. So yeah, these are all really good examples here, but pretty much, yeah, everything that got submitted has some really good stuff. And Paul, I'm going to call you out too, even though I'm not going to play it right now. But that piece that the arrangement that you posted for the last project, where you added the second part to, I already forgot what the piece was. I'm sorry, but man, you did a good job. Yeah, you did a really good job on your previous project that you just posted. So yeah, lots of credit to go around. All right, so what have I intended to play that I haven't played yet? Okay, Patrick's Danny Boy. So we're going to talk about Patrick's Danny Boy here because he's also got some really good stuff going on. But I want to point out, just like Greensleeves, yeah, that's what it was. That Patrick is dealing with an issue that's going to come up over and over again when dealing with vocal music, which is you want to have polyphony because we're taking a counterpoint course, but as soon as you do that, you make it hard to have understand the lyrics. If you've got different rhythms going on at the same time, you're not going to be able to understand the lyrics, right? And that's why so much of that Renaissance music was based on familiar text. So it's like Agnus Dei. Okay, I know that poem. I know that prayer. I've said it every week in church for the last, my entire life. And so once you hear two syllables of Agnus, you're like, okay, I know what's coming next. And then they just draw out those two syllables for a long time. And so you just can enjoy, 12 measures of music on the phrase Agnus Dei, and that's it. So that is one solution to the problem of how to take a song with lyrics and make it work in counterpoint. Another one that Patrick mentions is like use do backing, right? Use wordless vocals. Do, ooh, ah, yeah. Use wordless sounds as backgrounds. Of course, you could also make these be counterpoint. I mean, instrumental backgrounds, right? You could totally make this be. Let me just try something here because I'm just wondering if something. Yeah, I just don't know why sometimes I can zoom these windows in and sometimes I can't, and I have never figured out what the difference is. But so this is going to be small, and we're just going to have to live with it. So bear with me. Where did my chat window go? Here it is. Let me float it again since that didn't fix anything. And let's listen to this. And so he has chosen to say, well, you know what? I'm just gonna not have a whole lot of polyphony. I'm just going to let the rhythms be relatively similar. And then, that's totally legitimate. And then the trick is, well, how much counterpoint can you get away with? How much polyphony, I should say, can you get away with and still understand the lyrics? And I think he's found a nice balance in here, so let's check it out. So, yes, the fact that we have mostly homorhythmic texture, but he's still got places where he's got quarter notes against the melody's eighth notes, or that little eighth note line against the long note, right? That's the kind of stuff you want. And so he's done a really good job, I think, of doing things like that without having things like that that don't sacrifice anything about the understandability of the lyrics. Now, obviously, we weren't hearing lyrics; we were just hearing musical or synthesized voices. But you kind of get the idea, right? Um, that would work. Now, I am going to open this in MuseScore.com because I want to point out something. The harmonization that he has created is actually quite different than what it normally would be. And I don't know to what extent that was deliberate. And Patrick, if you're here, you can talk about it. But like the piece is basically coming off as being in C minor. So first of all, he starts with what we would say is parallel octaves, but no, not really. It's a unison texture. And that's an important distinction to make. When you want a unison texture, there's nothing wrong with it. And I mentioned that in one of the lessons, one of the really early lessons. And I think I give a Beethoven example where he's got multiple things going on and then one little passage of the hands moving together in octaves to get that texture. So when you want the texture of an entire line doubled in octaves, it's totally fine. And so he's got that going on here, and then splitting. I call that a peel off. It's a term that I've heard used, where you have a line that starts off in unison, but then it starts splitting up. Sometimes it's one note staying constant while the other note moves down. But that type of thing of something diverging like that is a powerful technique. So he starts off with this unison, and that's really typical for pickups, that they might be in unison, and then starts splitting up in harmony, and then lands on a triad. Now the thing is, this triad that he's landed on here is a C minor triad. That is not the sound we normally associate with this song, right? It would normally be something like something more like that, landing on an E flat chord. So the fact that he hits us right off the bat with a chord we don't expect, it sets you up to be like, oh, wow, this is going to be a different arrangement, right? And so there's a lot of things going on that are different than you might expect if you were thinking harmonically. And so if you're thinking harmonically, you might not have come up with these chords. Maybe you would have, but maybe not. But if you're thinking contrapuntally and just thinking, I want consonances, you're going to get triads, but they might not be the triads you expect. And this is something that we're going to see as we look at some more Renaissance music, when we look at the motets later on. We talk about Renaissance motets, how they're going to have triads all over the place. But because they are the result of thinking about intervals and not so much thinking about harmony, you're going to get triads that work in slightly unusual ways, like this. And so what we get is an overall minor sound here, but you look at it and go, oh, those are all consonant intervals, right? Now that is a really good feature here. Now I will say that maybe sitting on that C as much as we do, that is an awful lot of C at the beginning. And there's like a fine line that what we get to walk of when are you doing something because it's an interesting device, and then how much of it is too much. And so starting right off with that pedal point is what I might call it, keeping a common note in the bass over all that melody. That's basically what we would call pedal point, based on the idea of an organ pedal. Boom, and then you play all this stuff here, holding out that bomb in the pedal, right? So this has a pedal point effect. Pedal point is typically not something you start a piece with. It's something you do towards the end at a climactic juncture. And so, but it creates drama here. And so I think it's really interesting how that works. And the fact that, like, in certain places, like right here on beat 2, we just have that tripled C. So that's kind of emphasizing it that much more, that it is this really powerful C drone sound, even more than the C minor triad. But then going forward, it starts being more varied, right? But still also, repeating those notes. Now, here's the thing where it didn't need to repeat those notes, right? If you weren't worried about the lyrics, that could have been a half note, right? And that would have felt more the way we expect it. And so this is a thing to think about when you do this sort of thing, this like trying to write counterpoint for vocal music. This is a technique that you'll see used. People have mixed feelings about it, and I'm not going to judge either way on it. But if you didn't want to have to repeat that G 4 times, but you didn't feel like changing notes, you could just have it be down, side, down, side. In other words, just cut out the mountain. That is it's a valid technique to say, I don't want to just repeat that pitch, but I don't want to have to write other pitches either because I want the half note. You could just cut out some words. And then it doesn't make grammatic sense anymore. Down, side, it doesn't make any grammatic sense. Some people are okay with that. Some people are like, that's cheating, I don't like it. Whatever. I will do that if I have no other choice. I generally won't go there first, but this is a good case for it. If you wanted to feel a little more contrapuntal here and didn't want to have that repeated G, I think the half note would have been a stronger choice there, and then just sacrifice the lyrics. That would be totally legitimate to do that. Of course, if they were wordless vocals, or if this was an instrumental bass part instead of a vocal bass part, that wouldn't even come up as an issue. So anyhow, that's just some observations about that piece, because he's going in a totally different place with this harmonically, this C minor thing. You look at it and go, wow, all these things work interval-wise. It's just surprising sounds. And that's good. I like to be surprised, right? There is a curious thing going on in this measure here. That sounded like parallel fifths to me, right? For some reason, I thought I heard or something like that, but I don't actually think there are parallel fifths in here, or parallel octaves or anything. But it's a little deceptive because we get to hear this G against that D, and then we get to hear this F against that C, right? So they're in different voices. Nothing about the usual rules about when parallel fifths are, how much you can get away with. Nothing would suggest that that was going to be at all problematic. But when I listen to it, I'm like, boy, it sounds like parallel fifths. What's going on? But yeah, you can't even attribute to anything in particular because everything about that is supposed to work. There's something about it that feels a little hollow, and I can't put my finger on it, and maybe someone else can. Um, Maybe it's also about that tritone leap. Maybe that's what it's about. I don't know, but it's not a problem. It's just interesting. Parallel measure 4 at the end. Oh, yes. So here also parallel. Oh, yeah, just the parallel, not like parallel in a bad sense, but so this is a thing to know. Parallel triads work great when they're in inversions, right? If you have root position triads, you're going to have parallel fifths. But if you have inverted triads, there's no fifths. So parallel triads work great, especially in first inversion. And that's exactly what's going on here. We have a first inversion triad, an A flat triad here, and then a B flat triad there. And that's a beautiful sound. Parallel first inversion triads, especially open voicings like that. Man, it's a lovely sound, right? And then resolving it onto this open fifth here. Now this does give you parallel fifths, right? So that sound, so we have both the open fifth there, no third, and we have the actual parallel fifths between the top two voices. So that creates a certain sound that again emphasizes something about the rawness of this C minor tonality, this drone sense. If you wanted to, smooth that out, you could just have that B flat jump up to the E flat and let go. And then it wouldn't be that raw open fifth, nor would it be the parallel fifths between the two voices. So, anyhow, wonderful music. Thanks everyone for this. And yeah, next week we're going to start talking about imitation, and there's going to be so much to get into. It's going to be kind of a mind-blowing experience. But I'm so glad to see people participating in this project here. So, thanks to everyone again for all the music submitted, and really enjoyed looking at it and talking about the different things that come up. You all are doing a fantastic job. The imitation stuff, again, it's like this is in some sense what people think of as counterpoint about, or a lot of counterpoint is about imitation, and there's so much to learn about it in terms of the techniques and so forth. So get ready for yeah, a lot of new information, and the stuff on cannons is definitely going to be, I think, mind-blowing for a lot of people. So, do your best to get as caught up as you can this week so that we're ready to jump forward next week into imitation, and look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye, all.